So page 1157, 1 Corinthians 15:20. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For as by a man came death, by a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive, but each in his own order. Christ the first fruits, and then it is coming those who belong to Christ. And then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, after destroying every rule and every authority and power. Well, do just keep that open as I share a few reflections on this. Gene Hackman, Val Kilmer, George Foreman, John Hemingway, so the last surviving Battle of Britain pilot, what do they all have in common? In the past couple of months, they all died. Some had long lives. Sir Gene was 95, the fighter pilot was 105, but sooner or later, we all die. Humanity has got a big problem, and it's called death. But don't worry, Brian Johnson has the answer. He's just launched a new religion, and it's called Don't Die. So on Twitter, on X, he announced last month, he said, "Dear humanity, I'm building a religion. Here's what's going to happen. Don't Die becomes history's fastest growing ideology. It saves the human race and ushers in an existence more spectacular than we can imagine." The 47-year-old multimillionaire spends $2 million a year on staying youthful. And maybe you've seen the Netflix documentary about him. It's called Don't Die, the Man Who Wants to Live Forever. He claims to be winning gold in the Olympics for health. He claims to have the best biomarkers of anyone in the world. And he's after recruits to join him in, quote, his war with death and its causes, building towards an infinite horizon and fighting for the freedom to exist as long as one chooses. Well, so far he's only got 12,000 people who've signed up, so he's a fair way off the 1 billion he reckons he's going to get. I think most people recognise that in this war with death, there's only ever going to be one winner, and it ain't him. He says that, quote, conquering death will be humanity's greatest achievement. Well, yes, but it's fancy land. He may have great biomarkers, but sooner or later, Brian himself is going to die. And his $2 million a year spent on his health, it may delay death, but it's not going to stop it. He's right that death is the problem. He's wrong in thinking that he has got the solution. We need something better. And the better is what Easter gives us. Jesus Christ, in his resurrection, has already achieved what Brian Johnson desperately longs for, and that is the conquest of death, the death of death. So he has done what humanity cannot do, and this is where hope is to be found. That is the message of these verses I just read in 1 Corinthians 15. Notice three wonderful truths in this passage. I put them inside your service sheets. The first one there, Christ's resurrection guarantees our own, and the passage is printed there as well. The previous verses were looking at the sort of what if Christ hadn't been raised, and this now goes on in verse 20, but in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. Killed and buried on the Friday, but then seen very much alive on the Sunday. The tomb was empty. We've read the account. He was seen by many different witnesses over the weeks ahead. They met him. They talked with him. They ate with him. They touched him. And so the early church began, founded on this conviction that Jesus had been raised to life. Now, you might say, if that happened, then it's truly remarkable. But what is the relevance to me today of an event which took place 2,000 years ago, 2,000 miles away? Well, verse 20. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. Christ's resurrection guarantees our own. So his resurrection means the resurrection of his people is inevitable. It's called the first fruits. Now, what were first fruits? First fruits were the first bit of the crop each year. And when the first fruits were brought in, maybe of grapes or wheat or olives, whatever the harvest was, that was a guarantee that the full harvest was soon going to come. This is saying Christ's resurrection is the first fruits. It's God's pledge to us that his people will be raised as well. The harvest is guaranteed. So when you buy a car, you might first put down a deposit. The deposit is a guarantee to the seller that the rest of the payment is going to follow. Or a film trailer is released online, and that 2-minute clip is a guarantee that the rest of the film will soon be at the cinema near you. Or someone is making a cake, and then they let you take a spoon and eat some of the cake mixture, and it's a guarantee that soon you'll get to enjoy the full cake. So Christ's resurrection is a guarantee and a foretaste from God of what is to come. The resurrection from the dead of all his people. Physical resurrection, just like Christ was physically raised. And that's why death is described here in verse 20 as just falling asleep. So because of Christ's resurrection for his people, dying is just like falling asleep. And one day the body will be woken up to a new day. And in fact, the word cemetery comes from the Latin word for a dormitory, because a dormitory is where lots of people are asleep. So Christ is the first fruits, and Christ is the head of a new humanity. So if you've got to open there, verse 21, it says, "For as by a man came death, by a man has also come the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive." First man in human history was Adam. He sinned. He disobeyed God. And as a result, he died. But unfortunately, that didn't just affect him. It's affected all of us. Sin and death entered the world through him because Adam represented team humanity. When he lost, we all lost. Last week, I popped into the local rowing club down here on the Isle of Dogs to watch the boat race on TV. But the football was on. And I said to the bar lady, I thought a boat club would be a fairly safe bet for watching the boat race. And she said, "Not when West Ham's playing." Well, those West Ham supporters will have been saying afterwards, "We lost." We? They weren't playing, they were just downing the pints in the bar. But it's their team, and when their team lost 2-1 to Liverpool, they, the supporters, lost. In the Garden of Eden, team humanity lost. And as those in Adam, we all die. But this says, in Christ shall all be made alive. Christ came to represent a new humanity, a new beginning. And when he won, when he conquered death, we who trust in him, we won with him. We share in his victory, and we will be made alive like him. Death came through Adam. Resurrection from the dead has come through Jesus Christ. For those who are, in verse 23, who belong to Christ. Now, if we want that to be our experience, we must be joined with Christ through faith. So imagine I brought today a big cloth, a big black cloth, and that represents death. And imagine I then had a little piece of thread, and I said, "Try and get this piece of thread through the cloth." You would say to me, "It's not possible, it just doesn't go through." But Jesus in his resurrection is the needle. And he has gone through. And if we as the thread are joined to him through faith, then we will be pulled through with him to life on the other side. So when's that going to happen? Well, when Christ returns. That's our second point, verse 23. But each in his own order, Christ the first fruits, and then at his coming, those who belong to Christ. There's an order, it's saying there's a sequence to God's resurrection plan. Christ is the first to be raised to life, and then when he returns, those who trust in him, who belong to him, will be made alive. That's harvest time. When the rest of the crop is brought in, that's when Christ comes back. And when he does come back, that will mark the end of history and the start of the new world, the new age. Now, this is why when Christians are faced with death, they are not in despair, but rather they are full of hope, because death is not the end. The most that Brian Johnson can hope for is to live a little bit longer. But when the day of his death does come, as it will, his don't die religion will have nothing to offer him. It's game over. But if we belong to Christ, we look forward to his coming, when those in Christ will be made alive. What this means, though, is that Easter is not just a time of celebration, but it's also a time of waiting. It's a time of longing for what is to come. So Easter's great, Easter's fantastic, but it's also hard, isn't it? Because Christ's resurrection, despite that, believers still die. And we're left longing for more. We're waiting for Christ's return when his people will be made alive. There's a woman called Clarissa Mole, and I was reading something she wrote where she said, "The first year after my husband died, I wasn't prepared for how hard Easter would be." She said the hardest part of that first Easter was Jesus' empty tomb. On that sunny Sunday morning, I lamented the curse that is defeated now and not yet. I cried for my beloved husband, who still lies asleep in Christ. On that first Easter, I stood at the tomb, longing for Rob, that's her husband, to come out, but his grave in that quiet cemetery remains unchanged. Only Jesus' tomb is empty. She writes, the empty tomb is only the beginning. Easter's not an end, but a start. Easter's empty tomb should leave us wanting something more. She says, I confess I'm impatient. I don't just want an empty tomb 2,000 years ago. I want resurrection and fully realized new creation now. I want the hands on God's clock to spring ahead. The empty tomb has whet my appetite. That's what first fruits do. She says, each year we celebrate Easter still holding our breath. We stand beside the empty tomb. And, if we're honest with ourselves, it isn't enough. As we look around, we can't help but long for more. Every Easter since Rob died, I've wanted more empty tombs. Yet God in his wisdom and good time has so far only given me one, the most important first fruits. Well, she puts it very beautifully, very movingly, that Easter, it's a time of celebration, but also of longing for what is to come. So Christ's resurrection guarantees our own. Secondly, Christ's return is when that will happen. And lastly, Christ's reign will mean the death of death. So look at verse 24. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, after destroying every rule and every authority and power, for he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. After he's raised to life, over the next 40 days, Jesus appeared to his apostles and other people, proving he was alive, speaking to them, teaching them. Then he returned to heaven, what's called the ascension, and he was exalted to the right hand of God to reign in power. That reign is what's being referred to here in verse 25. It says, for he must reign. Do you ever play that game, Where Are They Now? You ever play this game, Where Are They Now? So basically what you do is you go online and you look up people that you knew many years ago. Maybe when you were a student, they were a fellow student with you, and you see, what are they up to now? Where are they now? And they're now, CEOs of banks or leaders of small countries or whatever. And it's quite fun, isn't it, reading up about people and what they've gone on to do with their lives. Let's do that with Jesus. Where is he now? What's he doing now? Well, the Son of God came to earth in weakness. He was born as a baby, executed on a cross. Where is he now? Well, he now reigns in power in heaven. CEO, not just of a bank, but of the world. Now that kind of power would be very scary in the wrong hands. I'm sure we can all think of some current rulers of countries that we really wouldn't want to have that kind of power. But the Christ is using it for the good. He will reign, it says, until he has put all his enemies under his feet. So all the spiritual forces of evil, all God's enemies, Christ will, verse 24, destroy every rule and every authority and power. And that includes the last enemy that Brian Johnson is trying to take on. So verse 26 says the last enemy to be destroyed is death. The high point of Christ's reign will be the destruction of death, the last enemy. So when his people are raised to life, death will be finally defeated. What is humanity's biggest enemy? Looking back over human history, what has left us constantly defeated? It's death. Everybody dies. Against this enemy, nobody stands a chance. He's too strong. He's too powerful. He's like that big bully in the playground. He always wins. No matter how wealthy or successful someone is, no matter how influential they've been, death always wins. And people have their courageous battles with this or that disease, but in the end, we always lose. It's not an even fight. But in Christ, death has finally met his match. So in his resurrection, that first Easter Sunday, Jesus defeated death with a knockout blow. He's now reigning world champion, and when he returns, he will destroy death once and for all. Imagine the party that is going to be when that happens. What a sort of mother of all celebrations. When the last enemy is finally destroyed. The day death dies, when the kingdom comes. You going to the party? Are you going to be there at that party? Everyone's invited, but we need to RSVP now in this life and become one of Christ's people now. Because those who will be made alive on that day are those who belong to Christ, those in Christ. And if we are not on that day, we are aligning ourselves with the enemies who will be destroyed. In December 1941, Winston Churchill heard the news that the Japanese had bombed the US fleet at Pearl Harbor. And it meant that the US was now going to enter the war against Germany, and once that happened, the result was a foregone conclusion. Victory was certain, even if it would take many years. And so Churchill wrote this. He said, "So we'd won after all. We'd won the war. No doubt it would take a long time, many disasters, immeasurable cost and tribulation lay ahead, but there was no more doubt about the end." He says, "I went to bed and slept the sleep of the saved and the thankful." The resurrection of Christ means that there is no doubt about the end. The war is won. Death will be destroyed. How will you feel, though? How will you feel going to bed tonight? Will you lie awake worrying about death? Or will you sleep the sleep of the saved and the thankful? Let's pause for a moment to reflect on what we've heard, then we're going to join together in prayer.